Okay. For the last forever, I've had this long-term goal of becoming a professional artist. And within the last year, I've accomplished that goal. It's left a void. Aww. Where I had this really strong motivator and work bleeding into my personal life because I had so much passion to achieve this thing. Now I want to compartmentalize my time better and make sure I'm being well-rounded and finding meaning in a lot of areas of my life and making new goals. If you are not following me on social media, I highly suggest you do, because sometimes I do open calls and you can be a direct contributor to influencing some of the work that I'm doing. Recently I asked what people come specifically to my social media networks for, what it is that I'm able to provide for you. Based on comments I've gotten, I want to break down my monthly video uploads as follows. I'm thinking week 1 of the month, we do a skit, something humorous, relatable, that can reach a wider audience than just people who want professional or artistic development, something that can bring in my friend Hoodie a lot more. Second week, I want to create more learning content, tips, tricks, so you can grow your artistic practice. Third week is a wild week, and I think often I won't make a video on the third week. I would like to expand the projects that I'm doing to try new things, so that on our fourth week, we can do our art talk videos, time-lapse with a topic overlay that we can talk about almost podcast style. And by having a week off, I would like to be able to bring what I've learned throughout the month and what side projects or things I have that I'm working on for direct feedback, and also so that you can kind of see my journey with my artistic and professional development to share more useful information with you. If I am missing anything in those video topic ideas, I would love to hear if there's anything more that you do feel like you came to my channel looking for that I can be implementing so I can make this channel its best version of itself. Now, we are going to dive right into our first educational type video. It's not the right week, but whatever. We're talking about painting techniques and tips, things to help you in your practice develop. So let's get started. I have over to the left some of our schematics for this, how long it took. That's only while the camera was rolling, not including research time or whatever I'm doing. We are working in acrylic today on 140-pound watercolor paper. That masking tape is to give us a clean edge so that we also have a border to work with. Now, this is not sponsored, so don't look at that. I just wanted to show you that we are working with heavy body acrylic paint because some people had questions when I sourced for what you guys wanted to learn in this painting technique video. And some people were curious about creating good opacity, and I really think that having a heavy body paint is extremely useful to me. Essentially, we're going to go through this similar to a tutorial style, but I'm going to be focusing on some of those key points as we go throughout this. On Instagram, I asked what you guys would like to learn technique-wise, and those were the most common ones. I'm going to be doing a lot more educational type videos on this channel, I believe. Let me know if that is something that you are very interested in. But this is our first dive into acrylic painting. Okay, the reason I am showing you for so long me doing this is so you can get a sense of a couple of things. People asked about how I do my vibrant colors and clean colors, and this is kind of a glimpse into some of my methodology, the way I'm actually working with my palette while I'm making these images. For one, keeping these separated pools of color and just scooping paint out of them and mixing in the middle so that I can conserve the paint that I have and also not get the colors muddy as I'm trying to mix new colors from those same pools of paint. Okay, part of the reason why I did an underdrawing, which I don't usually do, is because I wanted to have clean white paper for areas of my cloud that I want to be super bright white, so I don't have to worry about layering excessively to get back to that white color again. Here I'm using a angle-headed brush and it is damp, and this goes into our first area with gradation and blending. It's really important with acrylic paint that you have a damp brush while you are trying to blend. And I would suggest controlling the amount of water that is on your brush by tapping into the water and then wiping it off on your palette or wiping it on some sort of rag or paper towel to just have the right amount of liquid. You may need to get a feel for what this is like. And you can see I'm working with very thin amounts of paint over there on the left, and we're painting wet into wet, meaning that that back layer of paint is starting to dry since it is a quick drying paint, but it's still semi moist, which allows me to have better blending abilities. Now this first layer of paint you see going on is not going to be the end all background. I'm going to do this multiple times. That's just part of my methodology. I don't know if it is the best way to do it, but I tend to work with very thin layers of paint and build them up. This was actually also a question. It is how I contribute to having a very smooth, clean surface. It's because I am so conservative about my paint. But you can see it means I'm going in again right now with another layer of paint to make sure that that is just as opaque as I'm really searching for. And because I am doing this in layers, I do have to do a number of layers blending as well. So here again, I am blending up that color. And I wanted to create this gradient in the background here so that it has some more visual interest. And also this is just the naturalistic way that the sky appears in my reference. This paintbrush right now is completely clean. I dabbed off all of the paint, but it is a little bit damp and I'm making sure to control that amount of moisture. And you can kind of see how I'm working with my brush strokes to make sure that it really flows outward. The direction of your brush strokes is actually extremely important. We'll talk about that a bit more, but things to pay attention to that I'm doing. Next, I am using this angled brush so that I can have clean lines and pointed parts to my shadows, but I still have a wide enough brush that I can fill in slightly larger areas. I don't want a super tiny brush. You want a proportionally sized brush for proportional areas of coverage. So if you are working on a larger area, you need a larger brush. And that's going to be really helpful in terms of things like blending and full coverage. If you have a tiny brush, you're going to get a really scratchy look if you have to carry it over a huge surface area. So this is basically just color blocking right now. You can see that I'm not being super careful. Sometimes I get more careful if I have to do an area, but a lot of this is just getting my base background layer of color in so I can develop that and build it up in layers and build up opacity. You do kind of want to have looseness going on and not go for a super opaque look at first, because with clouds, obviously there's a lot of blended area. Even right now, you're going to see I'm kind of washing over with white to make sure that things look really soft. But there are areas where you might want to sharpen your shadows because you have kind of a combination of that with clouds, and that's what gives it a lot of its character. Obviously, there's tons of different types of clouds. We're mainly speaking to this. That outer edge of the cloud has a really nice, sharp, crisp line. I'm doing a little bit of cleaning up of the edges and adding texture. And what I mean when I say texture is not a bumpy texture you could feel with your hands. What I mean is that we're adding those little ridges and tiny rounded bits. We're speeding through this because this is just more of the same, slightly damp brush, blending things out, going back in once again and really accentuating the gradient. This is generally going to be a more realistic image. By the way, I'm using a dry brush right here, completely clean dry brush, and that's another way you can help yourself to blend. This is a more realistic type image, but I have been interested in abstracting the landscape, so I will add little slight nods to that magical component I want to put in more, but I ended up really liking this painting as a realistic one, so I didn't push it too far. Okay, we're moving on to the land now. This very first section is just doing a mountain strip in the very far background at the base of the clouds. So we're getting medium blue color, darker than any part of our sky, with a smaller angled head brush this time so that I can get a nice clean line at the top of my mountain. But then I'm also kind of softening the edges as I go down because I want the color to go past where I'm going to be painting the actual mountain so that I have something behind my tree line that I'm about to put in. Another thing to keeping your palette clean and your colors vibrant is making sure you are cleaning that off. Sometimes when I have acrylic paint on there that starts to dry, if I get it wet again, it'll start peeling up and mixing into my new paint and it'll give weird textures. You may have noticed that sometimes I use my brush to mix and sometimes I use that palette knife. The reason that a palette knife is kind of nice is because you can mix up one true color when you need a consistent color, like with the sky. This is the base background for our tree line. I wanted it to be really dark to show the shadows, and then we're going to work lighter highlights on top of it. And I made a really soft bottom edge so that it could blend with our grass line easily. You can kind of look at what some of the texturing is that I have for that tree line. One of the things people asked about was how to create suggestive details without hand painting every element with grass and also with our tree lines. So this is a more suggestive tree line. I'm not going to be hand painting every every single branch or every single leaf, but I am going to get the basic shape so that it suggests trees from a distance. You don't want to get too hung up on those details because from a distance, looking at something, you lose some of that visual detail work anyway. If you kind of pay attention to where I put in that lighter color, it's more yellows. It tends to all come from one direction, and it's similar to where the direction of light is hitting the clouds. It's all coming from that top left corner. So you have highlights from that direction and then shadows below them. Okay, take a look at what I'm doing. The brush strokes are going up to create that illusion of grass blades coming up. And instead of hand painting individual pieces of grass, what I do is I allow for my slightly separated brush hairs to create multiple lines as I softly flick them upward. That'll give you a lot of texture without you having to hand stroke in with a tiny brush. We'll talk about that more. This is mostly blocking in right now. I'm going to be doing layers of color, layers of grass blades, because it creates this nice visual history. You essentially are going to have grass blades of different colors on different levels of the painting that go back through the layers that I've painted. I'm speeding this up because I am essentially just building up the depth of color with this glaze, which is essentially a larger part water, smaller part paint, so you have a very translucent effect. I'm still being really careful in terms of the direction of my brush strokes. That is always so important because you'll be able to see those, so you can emphasize certain textural effects like your grass. By moving in the direction the wind might be blowing the grass, or how the grass is growing if it's a still day. I'm using a tiny brush right now because I want to add in a little bit of detail on those trees and kind of round out some of those sharper peaks that I created with the treetops. Not a super fan of that. And also creating, again, more contrast, layering in those darker colors, and then adding in some yellowy orange colors too, again on that outer left edge to create the light hitting it. Adding in more of the lightness to the grass area, bumping up our contrast, being patient and careful with our brushstroke movements, creating these long, swift, light flicking motions to go with our long, swift, light flicking grass. I'm just gonna speed this up because I'm not really doing anything new. We've talked about all those techniques, but I do still think it's valuable for you to see most of the process so that you can get a better idea for what it looks like and how much time and attention I'm putting into these areas, how much I keep building back into them to get the effects that I want. For this image, I wanted to create a really stark shadow up in the front, so I actually didn't use any black. This is a very limited palette, but to create that darker area, I just used blue and red, which made this darker purpley color, and layered on top of the other things gave it a lot of shadowing, adding in a little bit of glow to the mountains behind by adding some gradient with a lighter color near the bottom of our tree line. And then I'm going back in, can you believe it, again into our sky. For me, this is important to get the effects I want. I realize that the sky is a little bit lighter than I want, and I want a more gradient to it. So I mixed up this color, and then I'm just adding a little bit blue, and you can see how shiny it is. That's because there's water in there, but again, a controlled amount of water. Because there is water, and it is a little bit more like a gloss, it is more transparent, but because we've already layered up several layers with a similar color of acrylic paint to have an opaque background, it's okay to have a more translucent top layer to that. And again, with this blending, you can be more strategic than I am, hopefully, and then you don't have to do this blending so much. Maybe try to get the color you want better first, but it's worthwhile to finagle it. It's worthwhile to sit with it and make sure you're getting the color you want versus sticking with what you have out of convenience sake. I'm doing a lot more with just blending out the clouds, but now I'm doing something a little different, so we slow it back down. I decided I wanted more depth of color. Clouds aren't just white. You get interesting things happening visually depending on the time of day and the way the shadowing works, and I like to accentuate my colors sometimes a little past what realism is. So I did put some of that hot pink and yellow into it to have this warmth and interesting depth created in the clouds. It's only in some areas though, and I keep the pure white in other areas. If I were doing this more in a mystical, surreal way, I think I would exaggerate that color even more, exaggerate some of those glowing areas even more. So the area where it drops behind the cloud versus the top of the cloud, I might make that back gradient more intense. And with the grass, I probably would do some of the same things. So when people ask about that vibrancy again, I think it is bringing in a touch of surrealism by accentuating things that you're naturally seeing and making them more prominent than what they are in nature. And then you can saturate your images that way. I actually got the idea for this because sometimes I would drag images into my Instagram, but before I would post, I would like so much better the editing tweaks on them if I would saturate them more. So I thought, what can I do to increase my contrast in my images before I bring it into an editing program and increase my saturation as well, so I have those vibrant colors that I'm really interested in. So just something to think about if that's what you're interested in your own work. Our last steps are just using a hot hairdryer to break the adhesive on that tape so it's not ripping our paper, and then cleaning up things on the paper using an eraser. I would suggest a better eraser than that. And also, if you need to get rid of little tiny areas of paint, you can use a razor and just scrape the surface a tiny bit. Be very careful, but you can get rid of paint that won't get away with water. And then I like taking off the paint and just doing last minute touch-ups to get a real idea of what the image looks like. If you have any questions about techniques, make sure you leave them in the comments so I can address them in our future videos with any medium. Let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you are subscribed and liking this video and leaving me comments to help me generate ideas for improving the quality of this channel. Next week I will be on vacation visiting my family in New York, so there will be no video, but I will see you guys the week after that. So have a fantastic next couple of weeks, and I will see you soon. Bye.